Great. So if I could have some quiet. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Karis Roberts. I'm Executive Director at IPPR. And it is a real pleasure to have so many of you in the room. I'm sorry that we don't have enough seats for all of you. But hopefully the event will be exciting enough that you will not need a seat. Excellent. So this is one of our regular slots at conference. It's the IPPR Big Ideas Debate on the topic of how do we deliver a just transition to net zero and restore nature. So we have a fantastic set of pictures on my right and a fantastic set of judges on my left. So judging today, we have Ed Miliband, Shadow Secretary of State for Climate Change and Net Zero. We have Leonie Cooper AM, Labour and Cooperative London Assembly member, Merton and Wandsworth, and also chair of the London Assembly Environment Committee. Warm welcome to Leonie. And we have Luke Murphy, our very own Associate Director for the Energy, Climate, Housing and Infrastructure team at IPPR. Pitching today, we have 4 brilliant pitches as well. So you're all in a different order to my notes, so this will hopefully not get too confusing. So we have Chaitanya Kumar, who is Head of Environment at the New Economics Foundation. We have Angela Francis, Director of Policy Solutions at WWF UK. We have our very own Carsten Jung, who's Senior Economist at IPPR. And we have Matthew Lawrence, who's Director of the think tank Commonwealth. So the way it will work today, each of our pitches is going to get 4 minutes. I'm going to be very strict. I will, in fact, wave at you if you overrun, to pitch your idea. And then we're going to take a few questions from our judges, a few questions from the audience, and we'll go through each. We'll then have a chance towards the end for members of the audience to pitch their own ideas. So do please be thinking as we go through then the event of what you want to raise. Great. Okay. So I think without further ado, we will kick off with our first pitcher, which is Angela on the Living Planet bill.
Am I going here?
It's totally up to you. You've got a lapel mic.
No, I'll go to the
podium.
Let's go to the podium. Thank you. So, politicians on the panel would probably agree that one of the boldest and biggest things they can do to show commitment on delivering an issue is take it out of their own hands and actually bind themselves with other bodies to make sure they deliver. Independence of the Committee on Climate Change, Bank of England interest-setting powers, Office of Budget Responsibility, devolving powers to Scotland and to regional mayors for great decisions in their own rights, but also things that we can see in the next little while or over the last couple of years have stopped things being quickly unwound and have made sure we've got voices that strongly argue for policies which sometimes governments, for whatever reason, are tempted not to act in the best interests of the country or are tempted not to follow the best advice. So I will pitch to you is that we need to do something to ensure we're making the right policy decisions on how we fix, how we shape, how we use the fixed amount of land and sea that we have for 3 essential things: for carbon sinks, trees, peatlands, seas and the seabed, for nature, and for nutritional security. Those 3 things are a job lot. We have them all together or we have none of them. And I want to talk about this in terms of land, but it applies to sea as well. We are using our land badly. Our policies are incoherent, and there's a wild west of competing uses going on, which are pitting nature and climate against farmers and giving nobody confidence in the solutions we're coming up with. We've got confected discussions about solar panels on farmland, but the real issues aren't being tackled. Agricultural land emissions are not going down in the UK, they're flat, and we still devote more land to feeding animals and producing biofuels than feeding food directly for us. Non-land use sectors are overly relying on nature-based offsets rather than getting on with mitigation. Some of those offsets are not worth the paper they're written on, but even if they were, it is not scalable. We can't get to net zero by offsetting with nature. We need to really promote mitigation. And some of those offsets are actually taking up space for food. We are not mitigating enough as a whole, and even though, we're not mitigating enough, but we're also actually destroying carbon sinks. So we're farming in a way that destroys peatlands, and we're relying on deforestation in the rest of the world for our food supply, for timber pellets, for so-called renewables like Drax. And we're creating carbon sinks in a really bad way by planting huge carbon pine forests, which are a carbon sink but are a desert for wildlife. We can't go on like this. We're asking for a Living Planet bill that assesses how the government's plans ensure that we use our lands and soils in a way that works for us, that give us a stable climate, rich ecosystems and a resilient supply chains of healthy food. This is complicated and it requires trade-offs and it requires science and it requires a dedicated body to look across government plans and ensure that they all add up. And importantly, this would ensure that the UK had a plan that didn't rely on offshoring our responsibility for any one of those things, for either our climate targets or nature restoration or sourcing our food from other countries. So that gives us a just transition in 3 ways. It forces companies to get serious about mitigation. It acknowledges the role of farming in meeting our climate and nature targets alongside food production. We have to do all of those things together. And it puts an obligation on us to consider our sourcing from overseas. And for the first time, take into account the UK has got targets for nature and net zero have got to be part of a global solution. We can't just be offshoring things. So I'm asking you for a Living Planet bill that plugs the hole in our emission reduction plans and allows us to bring nature back and ensure we have a thriving food sector that feeds us all. These are the essentials of life, and we can't keep letting them be the residual and the fudged bit of our carbon plans, which makes everything fall apart. Living Planet bill.
Thanks very much, Angela. Feel free to take a seat. Judges, do you have questions for Angela?
Do you want to go first?
Leonie?
I mean, some time ago in the past, when we had a decent Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change sitting next to me, we enshrined the Committee on Climate Change into law. I would suggest that some of what it's saying has been ignored since approximately 2010 and largely since 2015. So you're talking about a bill that would make something binding, but would it really be binding?
It's a very good question, and I think we can't fix what governments do, but I think the fact we have a Committee on Climate Change that has, and we'll see in the next progress report that comes out in October, their statement about whether or not we're on track will be something that I think will be a bit of a correction or a check and balance on the most recent statements from Rishi Sunak. This commission that we're proposing, a Living Planet Bill Commission, would be that check and balance to ensure that governments can't come up with policies that don't add up, and another independent voice, like a Bank of England voice, or like an OBR voice, or like a CC committee, says this isn't working, and it allows us to bring science and policy into the conversation. We're not having that. I mean, I think it's one of the things that ensures there's a confidence and certainty in plans that governments not only bring forward policies, but they put things in such a binding way that they're holding themselves to account.
I think probably on a similar theme. I think. I mean, we've advocated at IPPR for a kind of similar, a kind of nature recovery committee, which is for to nature what the CCC is to climate. But I guess on a similar theme, I'm not saying I think this necessarily, so I'm going to play devil's advocate, but isn't actually the things we need to do? We've got the Climate Change Act, we've got the Net Zero Law. Actually, do we not just need to crack on with the delivery? Because the biggest gap at the moment is between delivery and ambition. And I guess the second thing I'd say is now the right time for another organisation like that? I think we have, for the first time over the last couple of months, seen a kind of real attack on the CCC's independence by the Conservative government following their Rishi Sunak's net zero rollback. So can this really maintain the success of the CCC has been its independence and cross-party consensus? Can you actually create it in a time when one of the parties is potentially going in a rather different direction?
Really good question. So the thing that we think we're doing here is holding this government and every government to account on the things it has already set. So we have already set a climate change target. We've already set a nature restoration target. We haven't actually got a food security target, but presumably the government will feed us. That's one of their plans, isn't to not stop producing food. But those three things are not set together. And essentially what happens is we just do business as usual food production with most of our land, and the other things just try and fit in somewhere in quite a bad way. So we're not saying do something new. We're saying you have promised to all these things. Let somebody mark your homework and show how it all fits together. So we think it's possible to win in any government. But you're right in terms of it competing with delivery. What we're saying is deliver and set up this institution to show us how that delivery adds up. Because there are complicated questions to answer about land use. What we want to encourage is multifunctional land use. We want to have trees and food produce. We want to have solar panels alongside nature. Those things are possible, but not if we get sort of separate departments doing different policy that doesn't add up together.
Very interesting presentation. How do we make sure that the farming community is part of this conversation? And, you know, I think it's quite interesting that we talk about this idea of a just transition, but we don't really tend to include the farming community in the thinking about the evolution of land use and so on. So how do we make sure that they're part of this conversation?
Yeah. So we've been speaking to farmers about our ideas in this space, and I think one of the things that we've done as an environmental organisation, a nature organisation, is say we care about food security. We want to have a plan that also has food security in it. That doesn't mean that we are saying complete self-sufficiency, but it also means we're not saying we don't care about food production and we don't mind if we turn all of the land over to nature and climate and have our food imported. Neither of those extremes is going to work. So what does food security look like in the UK? We think it looks like regenerative farming and a change in how we eat, and we think it looks like sourcing well from overseas so that we're not undercutting farmers who are on a transition. So we set some rules around how we source, make sure we're not sourcing in a way that's low standard, deforestation, cheap food that isn't performing to environmental standards. And that bit of the just transition, I think, for farmers gives them a lot of confidence that the environment sector is saying, we don't just care about putting you under pressure to meet targets. We are also making sure that's possible for you because we're not expecting you to compete with farmers overseas, Australia, others who are not on the same journey. And I think that's a fairness that makes it work for them.
Great. I think we've got time for one or two brief questions, if anyone has them for Angela about this idea. There's just one over here.
Hello, I'm Rachel Solomon-Williams. I'm the Executive Director at the Aldersgate Group. Thanks, Angela, that was great. What you're describing sounds like a strategy to me, and it sounds like government departments working together to solve problems that they're all currently dealing with separately. Why do you need legislation to make that happen? Could you not just have ministers who actually agree to talk to each other and think about these problems all in one go?
Good question.
So I think we could have a whole separate conversation about cross-departmental working. It's hard. It genuinely is hard. But I think the thing that we want to do is acknowledge that those departmental agendas are supported by some science agendas around how you produce food or how carbon sinks work or how nature restoration works, maybe how it connects to resilience, that they don't all separately have the capacity to look at, and they would benefit from having a third party look at that, and in the same way the CCC commissions evidence and draw those things together. So, I mean, it hasn't worked so far, is all I can say, Rachel. It hasn't been successful, so we think we need more, and it's urgent, because it's not only that this is a bit of the carbon emissions that aren't reducing, we are actually making things worse for ourselves by constantly losing our carbon sinks and losing nature that's going to help us out of this. So it needs more.
Thanks very much. Please join me in applauding Angela for her presentation. I think next on my list I have Matt presenting on green corporate governance. Yeah. I don't think you need this.
Don't need a mic, great. Well, hi everyone. I want to talk about a ratio that sits right at the heart of the climate crisis, a ratio which if we don't resolve, we will not be able to deliver a just transition, but which I think this big idea of mine can hopefully help address. And that ratio is 1:6:14, 1:6:14. And that is what Shell chose to do with its record profits that came from all of us in this room and beyond over the last year, how they spent it. So for every £1 they invested in low carbon technologies in 2022, they invested £6 in new fossil fuel production and distributed £14 to their shareholders. That is a ratio which is killing the planet, which is driving inequality, and unless we fix, there will not be a just transition. And I think the key point in a way is that that ratio is not an aberration, it's not the system malfunctioning, it's the system and these companies operating as designed, not because they're bad companies, bad people per se, but because of the rules that govern the company. And that's really what the big idea is about. It's about saying, look, unless we change the rules that govern the company, change its purpose, change its priority, we are always going to be running uphill an escalator that's coming down. Otherwise, that metaphor doesn't work. And so that's fundamentally the big idea. And I think, the rules that govern the company currently force companies in a very narrow way. It's to maximize shareholder wealth and distribute it to their shareholders. That's where you get that 14 from. Rather than focusing on investment for long-termism, investment to drive sustainable growth, investment to create clean energy. So the big idea is the Green Companies Act, which has 3 elements to it. First, it would shift company purpose from short-term shareholder wealth maximization to long-term value creation, which has the interests of people and planet right at the heart of it. Second, it would require that companies, publicly listed companies, would be required to align annually their investment programs with net zero. So you can't have ratios like 6-to-1. That will just end in crisis. And finally, to give it bite so that it really sort of drives changes in behavior, we should make directors liable for climate damages which their companies are directly responsible for. And that, indeed, it will give us some bite. And if we do those 3 things together, I think there's 3 things that appeal to Labour about that. First, it allows good businesses to thrive. There are loads of brilliant businesses doing fantastic work to drive just transition, but they're held back by the rules that favour those that sort of do the sort of ratio we've discussed. Second, it doesn't cost money. This is about changing the rules. It's not necessarily about big public spending programs. It's about giving companies the chance to think through how they do this without imposing it, but it is creating the framework for them to drive this. And finally, it's in the Labour tradition. I mean, maybe a young SPAD was working in the Treasury, the Companies Act in 2006, sort of preparing it. But this type of thing, a Green Companies Act, is exactly the type of thing a bold, progressive Labour government does. It changes the rules to make it work for people and planet. So the big idea is a Green Companies Act that can work for all of us and the planet.
So, Green Companies Act. Which of our judges would like to come in first?
It sounds like it's going to be a busy legislative agenda with Matt and Angela's idea on the table. I guess my question is there a parallel in other sectors or areas where you're making individuals responsible for corporate decisions in that way? Is there a parallel? Is that a usual thing to do? I mean, I'm not that familiar with corporate governance in that sense. So yeah, I kind of, either in the UK or elsewhere, is that actually deliverable? Is that doable?
Yes, so I think one thing to note is quite how far the UK is out of the mainstream for European corporate governance in particular. So if you look at sort of the rankings, we're 3rd from bottom in terms of the rankings in Europe as sort of a European index of how far we prioritise sort of short-term shareholder interests versus recognising the company is a stakeholder institution. It's something that everyone who works in it, its suppliers, its customers are all part of in a way. So we're quite unusual in that regard, and that tends to lead to much more unequal, much often more carbon-intensive, short-termist investment decisions. So there's plenty of examples across Europe we could look towards for more inclusive sort of green corporate governance. And I think the second point would be, and to go back to Shell as a sort of illustration, is that in some ways by changing the rules, you're making it much less about individual choice. So for example, Shell, people might have seen at its recent AGM, its new CEO said, actually, we're going to sort of pivot away from renewables. We're going to sort of stop investing in renewables because it's no longer profitable. And again, whether the Shell CEO is a good or a bad person is by the by, that decision was based on a fundamental point. The rules pressure companies like Shell and all companies to focus, to be disciplined on one goal, maximizing returns for shareholders. So they didn't really have wiggle room. They didn't really have choice. They were driven by the logic of the rules to those type of outcomes. But we need to create the rules so that actually good behavior is rewarded. And so it doesn't become about individual choice to be a good company or not. The rules systematically support good companies to thrive.
Thanks.
I've got one short question, which is, are you completely wedded to calling it the Green Companies Act, because some of us in the room are facing challenges from Green councillors and Green Assembly members and all that sort of thing. So would it be possible to call it the Environmental Companies Act or the Sustainable Companies Act instead? That's the short one, and I can hear a resonance in the room on that one, because, you know, they pretend to be green and they will just say anything as far as I can see. So I really wouldn't want that in the title. Agree with Luke in terms of this very busy legislative agenda. Is Keir going to...
I think it's Lucy Powell. I'll have a word with Lucy Powell about it, yeah.
Okay, on this one, so you're not going to have to pilot all these bills through the House, so you can get Lucy to do this one. But yes, I mean, I think the issue about the level of return on investment for shareholders, I think, is very fraught, and we've had some really terrible examples in the field of housing particularly, where people have just had huge profits and they've taken massive profits out and have said they couldn't possibly invest in housing unless they're able to make 25% return on investment, whereas, you know, you go to the bank, you're not going to be getting that on your deposit. Do you have a sort of level where you think this could be set so that that level of return on investment that people, you know, the 1,614 is just horrific, isn't it? Do you have an idea of where you might want to reset the figures?
Yeah. So on the name, we could call it, you know, sort of progressive company. You know, that's definitely beyond my pay level. But yeah, I take the point. Although as a pluralist, you know, I like to think, you know, give people, spread it around. On the sort of legislative point, which we both kind of raised, I mean, one thing I would say is that much of policy debate focuses on what the public sector, what the state can do, yet fundamental to the transition will be transformation in the private sector and how it operates. And the company is the foundational unit of capitalism. And so unless we change its rules, we are always going to be struggling. So in some ways, I do think it should really be, you know, a central piece of any ambitious reforming government, because it is the company and how it operates is so fundamental to all the other things in the economy and its impact on the climate. And in terms of the ratio, I mean, I think not per se. I think, again, you do want to give flexibility, to give autonomy. I think you want to set that binding constraint around investment for, you know, companies like Shell putting forward investment plans which are clearly misaligned with net zero and a safe planet. That clearly doesn't wash. If companies want to distribute a bit more this year, a bit less, you know, I think there has to be flexibility, and I think that has to be iterated out. And again, if you have more stakeholders at the moment in the company, you know, the only people directors are legally responsible to in terms of annual general meetings and such like are shareholders, external shareholders. Labour, the people who actually create value in the company, they're excluded. So if you sort of said, right, you have workers on boards, you have workers being able to vote as a block in AGMs, then actually they would probably say, hold on a second, why don't we put a bit more of that into investing to improve technology so work is better? Or a pay rise, you know. Seems a strange idea, but how about a pay rise, a real terms pay rise? And so I think if you can sort of shift who has voice in the company, you'll change that outcome anyway. So you're almost like companies themselves will begin to better sort of think through the question of who gets to sort of share in the pie.
Can I ask you about point number 2? So there's rules are being introduced on disclosure for companies, and this is supposed to be leading to, and I think the British government have said they're going to do this, but they've got a task force on this, net zero transition plans for, I think, the FTSE 100 companies. What is the sort of evidence on whether this is going to work, this is going to change behaviour? Is what you're proposing in number 2 different from that? Just say a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, if a company is disclosing it is doing a certain set of behaviours, but those set of behaviours are being justified by that company because it generates very healthy returns, then having to Shell saying, you're right, you've got us, we're going to disclose the following sort of, you know, things, but also they generate 14% return and we're going to sort of distribute, you know, £11 billion, which is roughly what they did last year. The financial markets interacting with corporate governance will not punish them for that. They will not sort of intercede to shift Shell or other companies' behaviours. So I think disclosure is fine, but unless it leads to sort of substantive changes in action, it's really an inadequate tool to drive the type of changes and to support the type of good companies we want to be thriving. So I think it's, you know, we've been trying disclosure for quite a while now, at least like rhetorically, and it just doesn't have the teeth to drive actual shifts in
I
decision
think it
making.
is supposed to be leading to net zero transition plans. That's why I was asking about.
Yeah, exactly. But most of the evidence suggests that it's really not, or that it's quite easy to sort of greenwash, essentially, to kind of, balance sheet effects. So companies can kind of claim they're doing net zero by disclosing certain things, but in reality, it hasn't shifted how they're investing their capital. So it's really about like what they do in the real world rather than how they account for it on a sort of balance sheet. And so disclosure in and of itself, it's not that it's a bad thing, but light can sort of shine something on a problem. We actually then have to fix the problem, and it often isn't enough in and of itself.
Great. So I think we have time for one or two questions if there are some. I'll go over here. Sorry, Olivia, I'm looking around.
Thanks, Rebecca Newsom from Greenpeace. Really love the idea. Do you, well, firstly on the point of disclosure, just to back you up there, that all the evidence suggests it doesn't actually drive a change in lending practices, which is the main focus of the government's initiative. It's more on the financial sector, which leads to my question, which is that do you think you would need complementary regulations of the financial sector, for example, requiring 1.5 mandatory alignment in lending practices, to complement this shift in business behaviour that you want to see with your bill?
And I might just take one more.
Hi, my name's Tristram Burden. I'm a city councillor from Brighton and Hove, where we've just whapped the Greens quite successfully. My question is about benefit corporation certification and what role do you think that's playing and whether it's playing a good role towards the kind of changes you're looking towards?
Yeah, I mean, to take that first one, I think they're fantastic, but they're very often sort of fish in a sea, and what we want to do is change the sea. We want to make sure that that's not like an anomaly via some, sort of really visionary founder or whatever it might be, but actually that becomes the norm. And so that's exactly the type of thing that, like, putting a floor beneath company behaviour so that everyone becomes like that, or indeed higher. So I think it's fantastic, but I think how companies operate is social in nature. We have the power to change it, and so I think by sort of changing the rules, we can make things like B corporations, which pay things like living wage and sort of really sort of do try and like live the just transition in practice. We can make that the norm, not just the exception. And then yes, to Rebecca's question, I think fundamentally yes. There's obviously just no one lever you can pull and it would fix the scale of the crisis, which is kind of so institutionally wrapped up in capital markets and the design of the corporation in terms of sort of flows of investment. So I think shifting financial regulation, shifting capital markets, shifting how they're governed, in whose interests, it's absolutely all part of the picture. But I think to crystallise all of it, it's about whose voice matters, whose interests matter, what time horizons are we talking about, and who are the sort of, who is at the table making these decisions. And so I think sort of thinking about the financial system, thinking about the company, is all about expanding whose voice, who actually matters.
Great. Thank you very much. Next up, we have Carson, who will be presenting on digital infrastructure for the green transition.
Great, thank you very much. Let me start my clock. So I'm involved in a very exciting piece of work at IPPR on AI and the macroeconomy. So my pitch for you today is in this space, and it is to deliver a successful green industrial strategy. We need to not only invest in green infrastructure, but we also need to invest in digital infrastructure. We need green GPT. Green GPT, by the way, is a term that Matt just came up while we got mic'd up, so he's got the copyright. So what's the problem we need to solve? So there are some bottlenecks and potential pitfalls in the green transition. First example is decarbonizing homes. So I just came back from a conference in Germany where the green homes decarbonization completely blew up because people misunderstood how much they would have to pay, especially low-income households, for getting a new low-carbon boiler. Another example is in the UK, we had the Green Homes Grant, which had only 10% take-up because people didn't know about it, people didn't know how to get it, it was cumbersome, businesses didn't quite know how it would work, so they didn't sign up for it. Second example is public investment. So habitually, up to 30% of the public investment commitments that governments make isn't actually put into practice because local governments don't have the capacity to actually develop workable green investment projects that tick all the boxes. Third example, and we've done quite a bit of work on this at IPPR, and we've got something coming out soon as well, a lot of job transitions need to happen, including from AI automated jobs into green jobs. But we don't have the institutions that help people know where to upskill, what to do to transition into these new industries. So what's the solution? So we know from the economics literature that industrial strategy works if it's well designed. But what we also know is that it's not just about money. It's about the C, which is credit, which is the money, but it's also about capacity. Investing in the public services that can deliver stuff on the ground. And it's also about collaboration, because with these audacious targets we will get things wrong and we need to iterate and learn. And my pitch to you is that with the exciting new capabilities that we have through technologies, including some of the really breathtaking AI stuff that's currently coming out, we actually have those tools to do those three things. Give the credit, the money, but also capacity and collaboration. And so concretely, at IPPR, we have previously recommended what we call the Green Go scheme in our Environmental Justice Commission, which is the idea to have a platform that people and businesses can sign up to, and they get credits, which is basically, if you're a low-income household, you get subsidies from the government, and you go on that platform and you can spend it on home decarbonization. So you make it easy, you make it accessible, and now with the new AI technologies we have, we can put Green GPT on top. So it's not just a platform, but it is an advisory tool that helps people with questions like, does this work for my home? How much would I have to pay? Can you do a financial plan that outlines how much I would save over time? And the industrial strategy literature shows that it is often these bottlenecks that need to be untied. Of course, we still need the money. We still need government capacity as well. But if we invest big in these types of infrastructure, then we can really unlock some of this funding and actually make it being used on the ground. So this isn't just about, oh yeah, let's make government a bit more efficient through investing in nice technologies. These are big investments in making a public cloud, a public platform that also local governments can sign up to help with their investment projects, get advice. And so to finish off, AI, which is really scary, I find it really scary, some of the potential and what it might mean for jobs and the safety implications, but there is also a bold positive vision, and this is one example. If we build something like Green GPT on a public platform, then it could really create public value that maybe we wouldn't have been able to create otherwise. Green GPT.
Something and then put the word green in front of it.
I'm sorry, Leonie, we have a lot of green branding today. I'd like to go first.
Well, I'm delighted to congratulate Brighton and Hove on their triumphs. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing Caroline Lucas being replaced by a Labour MP whenever the next general election comes. May it come soon, rather than January 2025, which is my big fear. Green GPT, isn't that just going to be a bit like the equivalent of ringing 101 or 111 for non-emergency access to the health service or to the police? It's not actually going to fix the actual problems underneath. It's just going to give you an opportunity to source information. And isn't the bigger problem going to be the competing needs of big data centres. We've just had a big problem in London, in West London, where big data took precedence over being able to get electrical connections set up for people's houses. So it's not going to deal with that. It could exacerbate that problem.
Absolutely. So I would never say let's only do green GPT and not invest in renewables, not force companies to run their data centers on renewables and expand the grid and all of that. But I think it's just something that's easy to, like my only point is that it's easy to miss, to think about the plumbing that we need, including like the Germany example, where you have a bill for home decarbonization, but you don't have the information infrastructure for people to understand what it means for them. And so thinking about building that infrastructure first and setting up, like here's the system through which you get reimbursed, here's all the information you need, and here's all the advice, and then back that up with the really important funding and policy. I think that's just something I haven't heard talk that much about before, and hence it's perhaps a big idea.
I mean, it's a kind of nerd-tastic idea that I love. Isn't there something quite interesting about this, which is even on something very basic, like having different tariffs for different times of day, we are still miles behind other countries. So when the National Grid, I think before last winter, did a sort of kind of quasi time of day tariff, they found there was it was kind of massively advantageous. I mean, is your green GPT something to sort of help on that?
Absolutely. I think some of the things maybe you could, you could just push at people and give them a nice visualization or give them a nice update and then say, actually, you saved this much money because you used your kettle during a different time. This is your point, right? Yeah. And so help people learn over time. So give people that information and then also change behavior through those systems. Yes.
So I guess my question is this just a format where someone like kind of types in the questions and gets the answers, or is it more sophisticated where you might literally like take photos of your house? Because one of the issues around heat pumps and other things is that sometimes you actually do need someone in the house, right, to actually look at the property and judge it. So are we going to be feeding photos in, and what are the safety implications of that? Second question, government hasn't always been known for its overwhelming success in delivering IT projects, I would say. So my question would be, how can you, like, it should be, and it needs to be, from the NHS to this kind of thing. So what needs to happen to ensure that the government has the capability to deliver this kind of project?
Yeah. So on the first thing, I think that's a great example that current technology can now, you can take pictures and AI can process it and say detect very, very clearly and well what is on the picture, and it could give you conceivably advice on what kind of insulation is possible in your home, how much would it cost. So that could just lower the bar for people to do it. On your point on government doing it, I think this is a very bigger point, not just on green. We're currently on a trajectory where we have this insane innovations in AI, and it's a handful of big tech companies that will dominate this sphere and sort of dictate the rules. And they will say things like, well, we're better at keeping things secure. We're better at managing this. And so there is a scenario where we do green GPT, but it's owned by big tech. And I think that's another big idea. We don't have to settle for that. I think there is also a scenario where part of the infrastructure is publicly and democratically controlled, and publicly and democratically the rules are set of how these systems are run. And there's a few ideas out there. Some of them are government-run cloud infrastructure. You could only have the top layer be run by the government. But these are really important questions. And if we don't have a bold vision of what AI and tech for public value creation looks like, then we'll just outsource it all and be at the mercy of the experts in private companies.
I'm going to take one question, if there is one, and I'll ask you to be brief. I'll take this one over there.
So, whilst it sounds like a really interesting idea, my concern would be that I feel like this is massively overestimating the state of AI technology at the moment. So I'm wondering, like, do you think this is feasible given the current state of AI, and if not, how much time, money will it take to bring it up to that state? And also, why go with using AI in this application instead of just providing that information publicly and making it easily searchable?
Yeah, so I didn't properly understand the first part. Is it like how far away are we technologically to achieve that?
Yeah, because most of ChatGPT at the moment tends to mostly just specialize in taking information off the internet and rewording it. It isn't creating new information.
Yeah, sure. So on that, I think, so if people are interested, the paid-for version of ChatGPT is like, when I started using that rather than the one that's freely available, it like blew my mind. Like it is a lot, like it's really like a glimpse into the future of how good at reasoning these things are and how accurate it is. It's really, that's exciting but also scary. So I recommend everyone just use the paid-for version for a month and see. So I think we are here. And in fact, we're just having a paper where we look at existing technologies like GPT-4 could automate 7% of existing jobs in the UK. And we're developing a policy proposal of what a positive vision for that could look like. So we are absolutely here already. And I think because it is way more sophisticated than just a website with a repository, that's also where it could create public value. But again, we need an industrial strategy for AI to make sure it doesn't just automate jobs and wreak havoc and create misinformation, but we steer it to do cool things like help us with the green transition.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Carson. So it's time for our final pitcher, which is Chaitanya, who will be presenting on an energy guarantee. Over to you.
Thanks so much. I haven't got a new legislation, you'll be pleased to know. Certainly not primary anyways, but we'll find out. So I want to start off by stating a goal. I want to leave this room with 3 key words with you. It's not the National Energy Guarantee. It's 3 other words. But firstly, before I start, I need you all to sort of cast your mind forward to the year 2033, just a decade from now, not that long. The UK has fully decarbonized its power sector. We're well on our way. I think we'll make it. Giant rotating blades on the distant horizon, from off the coast of Norfolk to all the way up north in the North Sea, generating power for us all. Now, millions of solar panels are across all our rooftops, and millions more will be owned by us in small and large wind farms and solar farms across the country. Now, what I'm describing isn't just the story of clean energy, which I'm sure many of you are aware of, but more importantly, it's the story of energy abundance. That's the key word I want to start off with. Now, energy abundance feels a bit anachronistic, having just barely coming out, Europe barely coming out of the crisis and the stranglehold that Putin put us all in, and the energy scarcity that he created. But I believe all that will soon be behind us, where we make a U-turn from energy scarcity towards the notion of energy independence, towards the reality of energy abundance. And the real cherry on top is the abundance of near-free energy. Right? So bear that in mind. That's the first word, abundance. The second word I want to leave you with is security. It is a peculiar feature, I think, of man-made systems where abundance doesn't necessarily follow or isn't necessarily followed by security. Take food, for example, where the world as a whole produces a lot more than we actually need in terms of consumption, and yet even in countries like Britain, one of the richest economies in the world, food insecurity is pretty awful, right? If you take the resource-rich countries like Bangladesh or Nigeria, where resource richness and abundance doesn't necessarily follow security. In fact, it's the exact opposite in some of these countries. Insecurity is all they've known. And the same could be said of sectors like water. So the age of energy abundance, which I envision, that I foresee, does not automatically lead to security. So the question of who generates the energy, who owns it, who distributes it, and how we value and pay for it become critical questions. So security, universally, is the second key word. The final word I want to leave you with is efficiency. Another downside of abundance is waste and knock-on effects on the wider environment. The food system is, again, a good example of that, where waste and effects on soil and the natural environment are fairly evident for us all to see. And they're quite considerable. So the abundance of renewable energy doesn't necessarily mean we ignore the model of extractivism that we've all come to know and fear in the fossil fuel industry is set to repeat itself in the renewable energy industry as well. That notion of extractivism is very much still there. And also the associated financial and resource wastage that can go alongside as well. So these are the three words: abundance, security, and efficiency. And that is where my big idea today is sort of situated within. It's called the National Energy Guarantee. So the big idea is rather simple. Now, every household in Britain, regardless of postcode or income, will get a block of minimum essential energy to meet their daily essential needs for free. I said it, for free. So cooking, lighting, hot water, broadband, refrigeration, so you get the picture, right? As you consume more than that, you pay a gradually increasing tariff for the additional energy you consume. And for those households that have to consume more because a member in the household has a disability and has to rely on assisted technology, or you have children, or other kinds of demands where it means you have to consume more, you've basically ensured that they have an enhanced allowance of free energy. So how exactly do I incorporate the three ideas of abundance, security, and efficiency? First, we promise that the essential energy band is fully provided by homegrown renewables. There is no better way of showcasing what a climate dividend looks like. We're all thinking about it, right? We talk about climate benefits. What exactly is it? How does it look like? I don't think there's a better way of showcasing what a climate dividend looks like than channeling the near-free energy from the wind and the sun into free energy for households. The security bit speaks for itself, I think, where no household will ever face the horrible scenario of heating versus eating. And finally, efficiency. By charging more from higher energy users, we're directly encouraging them to use less energy. What's more, it also lets energy suppliers to provide innovative tariffs, as Ed was talking about, time of use and time of day tariffs as well. That can continue to be happening in this world of the National Energy Guarantee. So the agile tariff that some of you might be on that Octopus Energy provides, that scenario and those tariffs can still continue under this. So if you're serious about a just transition, then relying on our existing models of buying and selling energy will further entrench inequality, creating a new segment of marginalized communities. We need to actively avoid that scenario, and National Energy Guarantee offers a fairer way out of it. So yeah, that's the big idea. Cheap, abundant, homegrown renewable energy that powers our essential needs, delivers universal energy security, and encourages efficient use of energy. So you can tweet that. Thanks so much.
So, a National Energy Guarantee, judges.
Well, Ed and Leonie are looking at me, so I'm going to go for So, does this idea work now? Do we have to have energy abundance in 10 years' time before this idea works? At what point can we introduce it? And if you think we can introduce it before energy abundance, then who is paying, I guess, essentially?
Yeah. We'd argue it can start as early as next April, when the current scheme's support packages for households come to an end. But we are cautious that it can't be a scheme that can be introduced overnight. The paper we've published quite recently talks of a rolling period of 4 years where you can roll this scheme out, where the free energy component starts off perhaps at a highly subsidized rate and keeps increasing, and suddenly, a certain component of the energy consumption is free. So that's how we envision this happening. And in the interim, throughout the scheme's lifetime, in fact, you basically have the higher energy users that will cross-subsidize some element of this. The way we've done our modeling in our assessment is very aware that we can't keep putting billions and billions of pounds into such schemes. Cross-subsidy is one way, but we have actually set a cap in terms of how much spending you undertake under the scheme. And that spending is limited to the current government spending on schemes like warm home discount, winter fuel payments, cold weather payments, all of that. That amounts to about £3 billion. So within £3 billion, you can replace all those schemes with this mechanism, and you still have about 98% of low-income households that have a net reduction in their energy bills compared to pre-crisis scenario. That's a long answer, but yes, you can make it happen. Yeah.
So I guess I'm having a slight problem with the idea that it should be universal, because possibly there are some people who can afford it and wouldn't need to have that block. And I'm also struggling with the concept of who is going to measure what would be the sort of base level of need that everybody would be allowed to have for free, if you like. And then how would the decisions be made about the additional areas that you would then be allowed to have sort of like an uplift for the people that you've just described. And also in terms of abundance, I mean, as we know, there is abundance at certain times and from certain forms of energy at certain points, but there isn't always abundance from everything all of the time. So in the night, there's not much abundant solar energy, for example. So I'm not quite sure that I'm entirely aligned with your concept of abundance without some fairly fundamental electricity market reform and, you know, decarbonisation, decentralisation, all those sorts of things.
Yeah, I guess the risk I see of continuing the existing system is you will have a lot of people that can engage with the energy market, that engage in a way where they can flex, as we call it, flex their appliances, draw down energy when the wind is blowing and the sun is shining, and draw down when it isn't happening. That way you escape a lot of the costs associated with the energy system, right? But many of us can't, and that's where the insecurity bit comes in. So when you guarantee universally an element of security in that world, then everybody has a minimum that they can work on, that they can live with and sustain. And beyond that, as I said, you can still have all these innovative tariffs that allow people like you and me, perhaps, to flex our appliances in our homes and engage with the energy system meaningfully. Because I fear, in the past, we had this notion of sticky customers. Those were the customers that suppliers would gouge profits off, right? We will have a new segment of the population of sticky customers that can't engage in the way that some can in terms of flexing their devices. And that's the scenario I want to avoid, which I think will happen if you don't embed security in the design. Yeah.
I see the vision. How do you avoid, I think you sort of covered this implicitly, but how do you avoid sort of rough justice for large poor families who live in badly insulated homes who end up paying more as a result of this?
That's right. So the way the rolling scheme that I described over a period of 4 years, as you roll out this scheme over a period of a few years, at every step of the way, the way the model works is you're able to identify pockets of households across the country that end up consuming a lot more and having a lot more energy demand, but are on lower incomes. We've actually mapped on a map of England where these hotspots are. Bradford, Birmingham, Blackpool, these are some of the places where you do have large pockets of households where, because of poor energy efficiency, not for any other reason, largely for poor energy efficiency, despite all these allowances that I spoke of, right? Despite all those allowances, they still have a net loss or net increase in their energy bills. That's not an acceptable outcome. So what we describe is, over a period of that time, you can channel all your energy efficiency funding towards those households and ensure they have a minimum standard of energy efficiency in their properties. So it's a combination of retail tariff design alongside the energy efficiency program working together.
Fantastic. I'm going to pause this for a second there. So please join me in thanking Chaitanya. As Ed, I'm under strict instruction from your team to let you go at 6, but I wouldn't want to let you go without you commenting overall on the proposals, and which you think is great.
Fine. Well, look, thank you to our proposers, and I will let the audience vote rather than adjudicating myself. I just wanted to say a couple of more general things. Thank you very much for being here at conference. I have, believe it or not, been coming to conferences. This is my 30th year of Labour Party. I know. You wouldn't believe I'm that old. I first came at the age of 9. No, that's not true. You might believe it of me, actually. But I just want to say sort of 3 things, really, which is, first of all, there is a mood for change in the air. I've been coming to these conferences a long time, but our mood doesn't guarantee victory. And I think Keir is totally right to be the eternal warrior against complacency, as we used to call it. And the Tories are going to fight a very dirty and desperate campaign. Anyone who saw their conference last week will see that. For the record, we're not in favour of a meat tax.
That was your first piece of legislation?
No. But Sunak wants to have a row about whether a clean energy future for Britain is good for the country or not. Let's bring it on. Because what he is saying is not just... What he is saying is not just anti-planet, it is anti-prosperity, anti-security, anti-future, anti-young people. So let's relish the fight. Secondly, as Labour Party members, I speak as one, we're not very good about boasting about what we're doing. We're good at saying what we're not doing. We have a big agenda to cut bills for people, 2030 clean power, to have a new publicly owned energy company, GB Energy, to invest in the future, to have a national wealth fund to help ensure that we get the jobs from the renewables revolution that we can have, to insulate 19 million homes. I need you, we need you to go and tell people that in the coming months, because there are lots of people who don't yet know this, and part of our job in the next period is that people do need to know it, because the question people will be asking is, what difference are you going to make to my life? And that is the right question for people to be asking, and we have good answers to that. And the third thing is to say, I think Rishi Sunak said something very significant last week, which is that he wants a change election. Well, let's have a change election. Because the idea that the guy who has been the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, part of a government of 13 years with 5 prime ministers, is the change, I mean, who's this guy trying to kid? So we should relish the idea that he has now declared this is a change election. And we are the people who can change this country. Certainly, if the question is who can give Britain the change it needs, the answer sure ain't Rishi Sunak. The answer is Keir Starmer and Labour. Thank you for being here. Thank you to all of our panellists, and enjoy your conference, and sorry to leave early. Thanks so much. Cheers.
Fantastic. And so with that rabble-rousing speech, we now turn to our audience for pitches. I'm going to pick 2, and then we'll come to our judges, and if any of our pitchers feel like they want to chuck in an idea or add to a response, then they're very welcome. So I'm going to start over here in the shirt.
Hi, I'm Maeve. I'm from the Social Guarantee, which is a policy platform based around universal basic services. And my question is, the pitches are all absolutely phenomenal, but if we are going to have a just transition, we really need to recognise the importance of moving away from meeting people's needs through private markets that have got very little regulation, or they have some, towards collective provision of basic services. So a very obvious example would be that public transport is a lot greener than everybody having their own car. But like Titania said, it's very clearly a thing on energy, on healthcare. There's many ways that, many fundamental needs that we have that could be better and met in a more green way if they were collectively provided. So for a just transition, we're going to have to move away from private provision of basic needs and towards collective provision of basic needs. And my pitch is that. Do that. More public services for a greener future.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Over to you, Luke.
So I'm trying to think of a question. It's such a big idea.
You can have a comment instead.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's such a fundamental part of it that's missing from the conversation.
Well, in terms of, I guess my question is, what does it look like in practice, and communicating that with the public? I think one of the challenges, I think, around the green transition is when we're often talking about green jobs, people don't necessarily know what green jobs are. And like many people, I think, including yourself and other organisations, argue that care jobs are green jobs, that jobs in public services are green jobs. I'm just wondering how you think, what does it actually look like in practice, but also how do you actually communicate it with the public? Because it then feels kind of really all-encompassing. So how do you actually kind of communicate that kind of idea with the public and win them over, I guess?
Well, I think the first point of call is actually saying it. So when we're in these events that are talking about just transitions, it's about recognising the individual in that, the individual households and families in that, and telling a story about when we move to a green economy, so many different aspects of your life are going to change. It's not just going to be the energy that you get and the green tech that you have and the electric vehicle you have. We need to create a system of public abundance rather than private luxury. And I haven't got all the answers of how you communicate that, but definitely the first step is pointing it out at events like this, that is an essential part of it. So that's what I'm doing. We are working on narratives that can make that point and resonate with people. But yeah, it's a complicated thing and it's not an easy thing to do, but I felt it was very important to point it out.
It isn't part of the problem, though, that whilst we in this room, as Labour members, as socialists, see the collective need, I feel no need as a Londoner to own my own individual tube train, for example. You know, where would I park it for a start off? Less than 50% of Londoners now own vehicles. The figures are now very similar for many urban areas. And yet we've ended up with massive culture wars. Just around the corner from my house, there was a anti-ULEZ encampment covered in swear words and abusing the Mayor of London only last weekend, for the whole weekend, with signs saying hunger strike, and then they got out a barbecue. I mean, they are very confused people, clearly. But how do we get past that? And also, how do we deal with the fact that in non-urban areas, that actually people would just like anything, really, in terms of transport? I get cross if a tube train is, oh, I've got to wait 3 minutes for a train, how dreadful. Yet you can go to East Anglia, where I've also worked, and I can wait 3 days for a bus. I mean, we are talking about some big disparities, even though many people now no longer own their own private vehicles. And how do we get that message across that more of us can move to the not owning the private vehicle?
Just before you answer that, Maeve, I'm also going to take a question from Angela.
Yeah, thank you. I love the idea. I suppose I want to add to it I think particularly the strongest bit feels like in relation to public transport. And I think the other bit of the public realm, if you like, that we could be improving and delivering for nature would be making our cities greener and nicer places to walk and cycle around, and then making them connected to the nature around them. So how we actually improve the places we live in, cleaner air, naturally cooling, trees, parks, those things are the things that actually make a beautiful city, and they're not private welfare things we all share together and we deliver together. So I would add not just the services, but that public realm element.
Absolutely. And in answer to your question, I live in the northeast of England, so I suffer from terrible public transport. But to me, that's just an argument for more investment in public transport. Yeah, I think that we're talking about vote winners and how to bring people along on this journey towards net zero and how we sell green policies. And the way that you sell green policies is making sure that they have a fundamental positive impact on people's lives. Not many people in Wintley Bay are going to say, don't invest in public transport. We don't need that, because we really do need that. So yeah, I think it's more of for me, it's a compelling story for normal people about this is how your life will change for the better on the road to creating an economy that works for the planet. So it's win-win.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Maeve, for your pitch. I'm going to take another pitch. There are more hands than we can cover. This gentleman at the front now.
Thank you very much. Vincent Stops from Hackney. I used to chair Hackney's Planning Committee for 16 years. Concrete is responsible for 8% of the world's carbon. In Hackney, we have a 12-storey engineered timber building, 220 flats made out of engineered timber. So my pitch is that all buildings should be timber buildings. That would dramatically improve the built environment, because it would lead to forestry management far superior than it is now, because the forest, we would want to plant trees. I know that in other countries, in India, they don't cut any trees down because they're so afeared of it. It would present the world with the opportunity to start planting trees. In Hackney, we have the first ever 9-storey building. We've got 25 engineered tall timber buildings. Building with timber is now possible. It ticks the box of fire resistance, though some people aren't quite there yet. It ticks the box of being able to get a mortgage because the National House Building Council has approved it, etc., etc. So we could revolutionise building, and I've talked to people who live there. They love living in timber buildings. So all buildings should be timber buildings.
Thank you very much. I'll turn first to our judges for thoughts and questions. Leonie?
So, as well as chairing the Environment Committee, I also sit on the Fire Committee of the London Assembly, which produced a report after the La Canal house fire in 2009, talking about automated fire suppression systems that has never been implemented. So there are some discussions that still need to be had. I assume you're talking about CLT, cross-laminated timber?
I'm talking about heavy engineered timber.
Right.
Has the approval of the fire authorities.
Are you sure? Because I know there are some discussions still being had with the fire brigades across the country and the National Fire Chiefs Council about non-standard building materials and whether or not they are truly fire resistant.
The guy who advised Grenfell has also been supporting engineered timber buildings. The heavy timber, like a fire goes through a forest fire, the big stuff survives. It's the kindling that goes.
So, I'm going to make sure we get to both of our questions. So, Luke.
Actually, I was just going to very quickly go back to Mason, which I missed an opportunity to for a shameless plug for our Green Buses programme, which we have a big programme on, and I should have mentioned it because I fully agree with you. On timber, what's the barrier? Is it scepticism? Is it regulation? If Hackney are doing it, why aren't others?
The barrier is that the first building was in 2009, 9 stories. We've continued to build it. The industry, the building industry, has a whole history, 60 years of concrete construction, and it has got to change. Unfortunately, the Grenfell thing did put a doubt in people's mind, and the Mayor of London has been against it, but he's wrong, and that's why I'm here to tell you that he's wrong. And 8% of the world's carbon comes from construction, and that could be replaced if all buildings were timber buildings. If anybody wants to come and see 200 flats in a 10-storey building in Hackney, nothing like your, what was it called? Please let me know and I can show you around. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm going to pick one more pitch. I'm going to go at the back there in black.
Hey, I'm Rebs from Greenpeace. I wanted to come in with a more global idea, which relates to global climate politics and the fact that, as some people might be aware, governments across the world agreed last year to establish a loss and damage fund, which would channel finance to countries predominantly in the global south, or exclusively in the global south, in particular vulnerable communities who are experiencing catastrophic climate impacts that they are really not responsible for causing. Now, that's a great landmark, and we're now at the point of needing to work out where we're going to get the money to fill it. And you know, this is in the context of having actually come from a fringe event earlier with David Lammy, who said that his second top priority for diplomatic relationships was to rebuild trust with the global south. And we see that dynamic playing out in the UNFCCC climate change negotiations, where things are getting to a bit of a gridlock because of the lack of trust now between Global North and Global South, because of lack of payments to the Global South for climate finance. So we really need to come up with innovative ways to fill the fund for loss and damage, to deliver on that justice and those obligations, but also in the context of a cost of living crisis, to not add more onto people's bills here in an unfair way. So my proposal for that is to tax fossil fuel companies more and operate according to the polluter pays principle. Thank you. Yeah, the profits of just the top 5 private fossil fuel companies last year alone was $200 billion. And we really don't have tax systems either here in the UK or internationally that tap into that money. This obviously speaks a bit to Matt's proposal, where we need to actually reform the way that we have corporate governance. But what I'm proposing specifically here is a tax that makes fossil fuel polluters pay for the damages that they have wrought across the world, specifically to support communities in the Global South dealing with those impacts. And a portion of that tax could also go towards supporting a green, fair, just transition in the UK, because there's a lot of money that could be got from this proposal. Thank you.
Well, if our judges like to comment or question.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, loss and damage and developed countries making contributions to that, like actual firm commitments, is kind of long past time. It's been discussed at every COP summit for however many years, and it's only recently, as you say, that there was actually a kind of commitment to it, and now they actually need to be putting money in. I guess my question is around deliverability. I mean, how confident can we be that, because I presume you're talking about a kind of global tax arrangement, because that's the only way potentially it could work. And I'm just wondering about, one of the challenges around COP summits quite often, I mean, I think fossil fuels, the words fossil fuels, unbelievably only appeared for the first time in the declaration last year. Given that, and given the kind of vested interest in different interests around different countries, is it actually realistic? Is it deliverable? Because you might agree with the principle, and we absolutely do need to be putting more money into loss and damage, the UK and other countries, but the prospects of getting that agreement, what is the prospect of getting that agreement? How can we get it?
I might just take the other questions from the panel before coming back to you. So, Leonie.
I mean, deliverability seems a big thing to me. I know that we have managed in the Montreal agreement to actually come up with a global approach on CFCs, and that has obviously helped with the holes in the ozone layer. But I'm struggling to think of anything that has been really effective since that has actually had that sort of full global impact and buy-in from everyone. So that is one question. Oh, I think would be
abundance.
I was going to say, yeah, the energy is no longer abundant. And the second thing would be about who would then control it. Would this be under the control of the United Nations, or would a new body need to be set up to control and manage it?
And then I think we had one from Chaitanya.
Yeah, just a very quick one. I just add, I think, perhaps, because for me the challenge with just tax is, it feels like every time tax, there seems to be a tax loophole associated with that. Somehow we seem to find windfall tax came with a tax loophole. I'd agree with that, but I'd probably want to add another condition, which is what some in the sector have called the carbon take-back obligation. So every ton of carbon that fossil fuel companies put into the atmosphere, either by selling, producing, what have you, they're required to take back the exact amount and permanently lock it away, basically. So the advantage with that is you're not just taxing their profits, which is important, but you're also putting an obligation on them to not make the problem worse, because they'll find a way of continuing to pay those taxes, but carbon's not getting cut. They're still burning a lot more carbon. So if it's possible to sort of find a way of getting the mitigation policy alongside the tax policy together, I think that'll have the net benefit of actually cutting carbon and reducing the impacts of loss and damage over the long term, whilst paying for loss and damage today? That's, yeah.
Over to you.
Basically, I agree with you, Chatty. I think that the tax, I'm not just proposing taxes on profits. I'm proposing like a commission to begin with to look into a variety of different taxes all the way through the supply chain. And this connects to Luke's question. So I don't think it should be a global tax. I think we need to start with domestic taxes being led specifically by the G7 countries and others who have historic responsibility under the UN climate change framework. So that makes it a lot easier to administer, but also in particular in the UK, we don't just want an extraction tax, we don't just want a windfall tax. There are mid and upstream activities where the fossil fuel industry operates, where we need to explore other tax options which would be more applicable to the UK dynamics anyway within the industry. And finally, yes, okay, so it's a tax that is, or maybe a number of tax arrangements that is designed and administered by the Treasury that would then go into the Loss and Damage Fund, which is a real thing already, as a concept that has been agreed by countries under the UN. The process literally happening right now is to design that fund to ensure that the money goes to the countries and communities that need it the most. So this is a simple case of the Treasury paying that money into the fund so that it gets distributed effectively. Thank you.
Fantastic. So we're plunged into darkness, which means it must be time for the event to end fairly soon. So we've heard 7 fantastic ideas. We have had Angela pitching on the Living Planet Bill. We've had Matt pitching on a Green Companies Act. We've had Carson on digital infrastructure for the green transition. We've had Jitanya on an energy guarantee. And then we've heard there about the collective provision of basic services, about all buildings being built with timber, and about taxing fossil fuel companies and putting the money into a loss and damage fund. So there's quite a lot to potentially vote on there. To kind of help us navigate that, I just wanted to turn to our judges for any closing comments or thoughts.
So I really liked all the ideas from the panel and the audience. It sounds like we've got a group trip to Hackney planned, so we can do that after conference. I think, so I really liked the corporate governance reform in particular, but I think I liked Chitanya's, the vision that he painted of 2033 the most, because I like the sound of that. We've got a clean energy system. It's been achieved with 2030s. It's done. We're there in 2033. Energy is abundant, and we have the ability to be able to provide energy in that way. And I think there was a kind of real core of social justice at the heart of that. So I think overall, I really liked the ideas. But I think I'd probably vote for Chitanya's.
Great, thank you. Leonie?
Very good, thank you.
Wow, how do you choose which? I mean, it sounds like a very easy thing that everyone else is going to do the pitching, you're going to be a judge, just going to ask a few questions. Actually, no, it's really, really difficult. And also I felt very mean asking people questions when they just put forward a really great and interesting idea. I hope everyone else has enjoyed this as much as I have, though. I actually think that probably the environmental finance is the way to unlock the money that we will need from those private sector companies. Like it or not, they exist. Some of them are making huge global profits, as we've just explored in the last contribution. And I think leveraging in something from them where there's the so-called level playing field, where they all just know that they have to contribute something. One of the things that we've often discussed in the London Assembly is how much it would cost just to decarbonise all of housing stock in London, just looking at domestic dwellings, £55 billion. There is literally no way that's going to come from government. I can't see how people individually are going to, I mean, obviously some people can afford to, do all the fabric changes that they're going to make and then fit a zero or very low carbon energy system and so on and so forth. I think we need money from those private companies. They need to be part of the journey and part of the solution, and not continuing to be 1, 6 and 14 and part of the problem.
Fantastic. In previous years, I've tried to force Ed to take a view, and he normally tends to dodge it. And this year, he's done that by leaving half an hour early. So unfortunately, we can't have his review. And I also feel that with 7 excellent pictures, it's quite hard for us to kind of take any kind of scientific vote. So what I suggest is that we go through each, and you cheer for everyone, but you cheer louder for the ones that you really like. So we're going to start with The Living Planet Bill by Angela. Green Companies Act from Matt. Digital infrastructure for the green transition from Carsten. An energy guarantee from Chaitanya. Collective provision of basic services. Buildings made from sustainable timber. And finally, taxing fossil fuel companies for a loss of damage. Thank you so much. It's always so much fun to open conference with this event, and it's been another year of brilliant ideas and great discussion. So a huge thank you to all of you for participating, and a huge thanks to all of our pitchers and to our judges.